Hey. Woo. Haley, that was quite an introduction. I almost feel like I'm Jesus or something, the way that comes out. I think what it is that you're not pregnant anymore. Now you have a little baby at home, and so there's all this energy, right? Because when you have a little baby at home, you're just filled with energy. So, okay, here's where we are. We're in this series called Starting Over, and the subtitle of it really says it all. It's how to ensure next time won't be like last time. And so this is a series designed for those of you that are starting something over. Could be a relationship, could be a marriage, could be a career, could be an academic pursuit, whatever it might be. You look at the last time and you go, it didn't go so well last time. And so now you're starting over. Now, the restart could be partly your fault. It could be partly somebody else's fault. But either way, it's a start over. And the reason we're thinking about this, about next time being better than last time, is this. And as we've said throughout this series, we tend to learn from our mistakes in the arenas of life that matter least, unfortunately. And so conversely, we tend to repeat our mistakes in the arenas that matter most. And this is kind of strange, because when it comes to like kind of the little things like board games or new hobbies or sports or whatever, we tend to learn things pretty fast. But in the arenas of the bigger stuff like romantic relationships, like marriage, like our profession, like our finances, when it comes to maintaining friendships over many, many years, and the stuff that really matters most, and in parenting our kids, for some reason, we have this tendency to make the same mistakes over and over and over. And part of the reason for us not learning and not growing are some myths that we can kind of buy into. And so the first week, we looked at 3 of them. There's the experience myth. Okay, the idea that, well, experience makes me wiser. Okay, because I've been through this before, now I'm wiser. But the truth is, only evaluated experience makes us wiser. And so a big part of this series is trying to give you guys tools that you can use to evaluate your experience. And then another reason history tends to repeat itself is because of another myth, the know better myth, right? The idea that since I know better, then automatically I'll just do better. Okay, but we all know that is not necessarily true. Just because you know better doesn't mean that you have what it takes to do better. Like doing better often requires something of us, requires maturity, or it requires greater strength or a more committed will. And if you don't develop those, you won't be able to do better. And then we talked about the time myth, this feeling that time is against me. Like since I blew it last time, now like I'm really behind, right? So I've got to jump right back in. Like, since I dated so long and then it ended up going nowhere and just tanked, now I'm really behind. Because all my friends, they're getting married. I'm like, I want to hang out. And they're all like, well, we only hang out with our married friends. And so I'm just like, now I'm really behind. So I gotta get out there. I gotta put myself out there. I gotta make something happen. Or you know what? My business just fell apart, and I was counting on that. And so now when it comes to retirement, I'm like way behind, and I have less time, to get all this figured out. And so you know what I better do? I better go start another business like right now, tomorrow. Because look, everybody else, they're moving on and they're moving up, and I gotta get this thing going, man. I'm not getting any what? Younger. I gotta jump right back in. I gotta make stuff happen because time is against me, because time is my enemy. And so we said this time myth will drive people to do really, really unhealthy things. And when you come out of something that's hard, where there's a lot of trauma associated with it, it's really disappointing, or something that is filled with deep regret or deep hurt, you need to recognize before you jump into the next thing, time is your friend. And so often before you restart, it's a good idea to just hit the pause button. Right? Like let the emotional temperature of the last disaster come down a little bit. Let the fog clear. And then you can get some clarity about what it was that actually went wrong and what would need to be different next time for it to go better. Because if you want next time to go better than last time, you need to prepare yourself. And so this series really is all about trying to work through some tools that help us prepare ourselves. And last week we said there are kind of three vital practices. Anytime you're coming out of something bad and you want next time to be better, there are three things that you really need to do anytime you're going to start over. And we said we gotta own it, we gotta rethink it, okay, and we gotta release it. Why don't you say those with me? We've got to own it, rethink it, and release it. Okay, eventually you got to let that thing go, and we're going to talk about that next week, and that's going to be huge. For some of you, that is so huge. And then last week we talked about owning it, and own it just means you have to take responsibility for your part of the mess. Like even if your part of the blame is like only this tiny little sliver of the pie, you've got to own whatever your part is. Because what we want to do, we just kind of want to blame our way into the future. And you can blame your way into the future. But unfortunately, you can't blame your way into a better future. Because you will not grow and you will not learn and you will not do better next time unless you own the part that you contributed to the last time. Okay, so last week I challenged you guys to own your piece of the pie. Because if you don't own your piece, if you don't take responsibility for your part, if the whole approach is just to blame somebody else or some circumstance, history tends to repeat itself, doesn't it? And you'll just smuggle your issues right on into your future. And blame is this incredible thing. Blame is this thing that enables us to smuggle our habits, our dysfunctions, okay, our mess right on into our future. And when you struggle your stuff into your future, history tends to repeat itself, and you don't want that. So you got to own your part. And then today, we're talking about rethink it. Okay, now here's what I mean by that. When you look back on your last disaster, most of us, we naturally ask a question. This is a question that most of us will ask whenever we come out of a mess. Sometimes you ask it like internally. Sometimes you ask it out loud, but the question is this: what was I thinking? Right? Like, what was I thinking? Like, what in the world was I thinking? What was I thinking? Like, everybody I know, my mom, my sister, my brother, my neighbor, my friend, the guy that I barely know at work, they said that he wasn't right for me, but I went ahead and I tried to make it right. Like, what was I thinking? Or everybody said, dude, not her. Okay, but then I went ahead and I called her, and then the thing, there was sparks and all that, and it just sort of took off from there. And pretty soon I kind of abandoned my family and I left all my friends behind, and it was just me and her, man, me and her, man, me and her. And then it was a train wreck, and I had nobody. What in the world was I thinking? Like, what was I thinking? Or it was a deal of a lifetime, right? It was the deal of a lifetime. 25 to 30% return guaranteed. Like it seemed too good to be true, and it turns out it was too good to be true. So what in the world was going through my mind? What was I thinking? Or that class wasn't really that tough. Like if I would have just applied myself, like even just a little bit, I wouldn't have failed that class, and I wouldn't be in this academic mess right now. Like, what was I thinking? And we ask this question. But the funny thing about the way we do this is we ask this question, we go, shoot, what was I thinking? And then we just move on. We almost never pause long enough to actually think about it and come up with an answer. Like, what was I thinking? And here's the most maddeningly ironic thing about this. Most of the time, our worst decisions, they don't even make sense to us. I mean, later on, right, your friend comes up to you and your friend is like, oh my goodness, what the heck were you thinking? And it's embarrassing, right? But it's just like, I don't know. I have no idea. But honestly, before we move on, I think it'd be a pretty good idea to be able to answer that question. Because, think about it. And let me just tell you something painfully obvious, okay? Something that you all knew before you walked in here. If you think the way you used to think, you'll do the things you used to do. I know you guys are like, that's brilliant. So knowing like what you were thinking, like it matters. Now today, we're going to look at a passage that deals specifically with this. And some of you that have been in the church for a while, you know this passage like the back of your hand. But here's the amazing thing. These words weren't written by a guy. These words were written by a guy that had to have a massive start over in his life. Okay, the Apostle Paul, who wrote these words, he knew all about starting over, didn't he? Because when Paul stepped onto the pages of history, like when we first start hearing about his life and what he was about, he was characterized by this. He hated Christians. Hated Christians. Now, maybe you're here and you go, well, I hate Christians. Okay. He hated them more, okay? He hated them more. He put them in prison. You're like, well, I'd like to put them in prison. Yeah, well, he actually put them in prison. And so whatever your attitude toward Christians, we're so glad you're here. God loves everybody. But the Apostle Paul, he hated Christians. And he arrested them and he actually put them in dungeons where many of them died. And then he hit the restart button with God. And he lived with all of this the rest of his life. He lived with all this shame and all this regret over what he had done. And so he understands what it is to start over. And in this letter, he wrote to some Christians that were living in Rome. And Paul gives us insight into what's truly necessary in order to restart. And so we're going to be picking this up kind of in the middle of the letter, actually toward the end of the letter in chapter 12. But in the first 11 chapters, here's what he's been talking about. He's been talking about the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. That's primarily what Romans is about. He's been talking about what it means. He's been talking about how it sets us free. He's been talking about how it overwhelmingly demonstrates God's love for us. So the first 11 chapters of Romans are mostly about very systematically what Jesus has done for us. And then in chapter 12, Paul makes a turn and he makes a shift. And he starts to address how we should respond. And this is how he starts in the turn. He says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, okay, those of you that are followers of Jesus, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Now, in the first century, everybody knew what a sacrifice was. This sacrifice metaphor was not foreign to them because in Jewish religion and in Greek religion and in Roman religion, animals were slaughtered in the temples every day and sacrificed to various gods. But Paul says, look, because Jesus sacrificed himself, that puts an end to all the sacrifices. Instead, live your life as a sacrifice. Become a living sacrifice. If you want to live life out of gratitude, if you want to live life like in worship, then let your very life be the sacrifice. Set yourself aside when necessary and live a life of love. Okay, live a life of love toward God and toward everybody you encounter. Because all that slicing of animals' throats and all the blood everywhere, okay, we're done with that. You be the sacrifice. You be a living sacrifice. And Paul is like, he's basically saying, just imagine putting yourself up on the altar and saying to God, okay, God, I am giving all of me to you. Every bit of me. And then to flesh out what this will take, he writes down some powerful words. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Now, simply put, he's saying don't just live the way everybody else lives. Don't just drift along and go wherever the culture goes. He's saying dare to be different, like dare to be unique. In other words, don't be like this guy. Don't be this guy that just sort of values whatever everybody else values. Oh, is that what we care about, guys? Okay? This guy that just thinks like everybody else. Oh, this is how we think and acts like everybody else. This is how we act. Because that's what culture does. It just shapes everyone, and they all end up looking the same. You just like, next, 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 right? So Paul says, don't let culture do that to you. Do not conform, okay? Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Okay, don't conform to the pattern of this world. It balanced. I was worried. Thought that might fall over. Now, does it take a lot of effort to be conformed by the culture? No, not at all. It's pretty much an effortless existence, okay? You just kind of go with whatever, and you just sort of end up like whatever. This is just a side thought, and some of you might be offended by this, and if so, I apologize in advance, because it's always okay if you just apologize in advance. It's like when someone says, hey, not to, I don't mean to offend you, but be ready to be offended. Well, our daughter, Brooklyn, 10-year-old daughter, Brooklyn, plays basketball down in the Green Lake area, and she has practices, 2-hour practices on Saturdays. So I'll go down there and I'll drop her off, and then I go to this really cool coffee shop to work, usually work on sermons. And they have this, they have this chill vibe. It's Green Lake area, oh man, and they have really good coffee because it's not Starbucks, because everyone in Green Lake knows you can't get good coffee at Starbucks. It's this place called Cafe Vita. Oh yeah. And this is becoming my Saturday tradition. If you want to find me on Saturdays between 10 and noon, go to Cafe Vita down by Green Lake. But the culture at Cafe Vita is kind of interesting. And I don't really fit. I'm not sure if you would call it like hipster or what, but whatever the vibe is, whatever the culture is, it's not me. So it's semi-alternative. But like 2 weeks I was in there, and I looked at all the people. Literally, I'm standing in line to order, and I just looked across the place at all these people, and all these alternative, like I'm not like anybody else people. And I noticed, I was like, man, they're all so different in exactly the same way. I mean, like their hair was colored the same color, in the same way, and their clothes were alternative, like in the same way. They were so unique and different in exactly the same way. It was so weird. Now, Paul is not talking about the way we dress. So what I was just talking about has nothing to do with anything. It just struck me as odd how culture works. Okay, that's all. So Paul's not talking, he's not saying, hey, go look unique. Don't conform like, wear bell bottoms. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about living uniquely. He's talking about different values. He's talking about actually being set free from whatever the current of the culture is, whatever that's pushing to. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed, right? Don't just conform. He says, be transformed. But this will take effort. This is going to take intentionality. This is going to take some courage. But man, is it worth it? And the point is, okay, do not be like one of these guys. Don't be one of those guys. Be this guy. Now, some of you are like, Jason, that's not a guy. That is a car. I just want to say, au contraire. So yeah. It's just like, okay, ready for it. Huh? Now. Oh. So. Two for two on standing up. Don't be this guy. Be this guy. I mean, you tell me, who would you rather be? Right? I mean, come on. Who would you rather be? The danger is with this whole transformed, I'm going to be unique thing, is that we can kind of look at this thing and we go, yeah, I don't want to be like everybody else. I don't want to be conformed. I want to be transformed. And the mistake that Christians often make is this. And this is something that if you've been around Christian circles, especially youth culture, you see this over and over and over. Because and I think it shapes how we think of transformation. The natural inclination is we hear, don't be conformed, be transformed. The natural inclination is to think, oh, okay, God, like I promise to be transformed. I'm so fired up right now about being transformed that I can't even stand it. I just want to punch in the wall, like punch a hole in the wall. I am so in love with Jesus, and I just want to be holy and all that. And so, God, I am going to be transformed, and I'm not going to date like that anymore, and I'm not going to parent like that anymore, and I'm not going to blow up my life in ways like that anymore. And people just like, they grit their teeth. They're like, oh, yeah, I've decided right now I'm going to be transformed. And they rededicate their life to God, which is awesome. And then at camp next year, they rededicate their life again. And then at church the following year, at some point they rededicate their life again. And this goes on and on and on. And they say, but this time, God, I really mean it. I really mean it, because see, I'm clenching my fists and I'm on my knees and everything, and I know I said this before and everything, but then I totally biffed it, okay, but this is going to be different this time, and I mean it, and because I'm just going to promise God, I'm just going to promise my way into transformation. Now, we all know deep down that doesn't work very well. I mean, your last diet is a reminder of how this doesn't work. Okay, let me be honest now. You remember that exercise routine you had for a week and a half? And it's not that you weren't committed or you weren't sincere, you didn't mean it at the time. When you said you were going to do it, you really thought you were. But what happened the last time is kind of like what happened the time before that, and it's probably what's going to happen next time. Now, when we look at this pattern of our life, and we're talking about diet and exercise, that's hilarious. Okay, but it's another thing when it's your marriage. It's another thing when it's your career. It's another thing when it's your relationship with your kids. Okay, you don't want to have do-over after do-over after do-over in those kinds of arenas. And the Apostle Paul knew this. So what he says here is amazing, what he says next. He says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. See, if you want to be this guy and not this guy, then it actually takes more than extreme moments of rededication. It's going to require the renewing of your mind. And you can think of renewal maybe like you think of restoring something old. Just out of curiosity, how many of you have ever restored something? It could be a car, some furniture, something like that. Yeah. When I was 12 years old, I helped my mom, single mom, just me and my mom. I helped my mom refinish a piano. And man, it was what an amazing project, because we took this thing that was all beat up and just looked trashed, and we refinished it, and when it was done, it was gorgeous. I mean, it was beautiful. But here's what I discovered as a 12-year-old. This refinishing process is long, and it's slow, and it's hard, and it's not very exciting when you're in the middle of it. Because before you refinish something, before you put on the new, you have to take off the what? Right, so if you can try and refinish something, if you don't take off the old, you just try to throw on the new, what happens? It just peels off. It doesn't stick, it doesn't stay. So we had to strip this old piano, and we had to sand it and sand it and sand it for hours and hours and hours. And when you're 12, at least when I was 12, that was not very cool. It's just the slowest thing ever. I mean, it was excruciating. And this is the thing about renewal. We want to make it sexy, but it's hard. It's slow. And this is the part that we don't like. And this is the part that Christians sometimes don't understand. Renewal is not about an energized, emotional, dramatic, one-time decision. It's not. Renewal takes time. Now, it might start with a one-time decision. There have been a lot of people that have had a dramatic moment in their life where they have made a decision and it has propelled them into a future that is unthinkably better. But there's more to it than just that. You know, like refinishing a piano, for my mom and it started with a one-time decision, but it also required hours and hours and hours of dedication to a particular process. It took time. And this is why it's so important to understand. Guys, it is so critical that you understand time is your friend. And I look around this room and I think about so many of you. I see the story in your faces. I see it. Because many of you weren't even following Jesus when I first met you. You weren't following Jesus when you came to this church. But you made a decision somewhere along the way, and it may have been an emotional, like one-time decision. You made a decision to follow Jesus. You made a decision to trust him. And then you entered into a process. Maybe it started with just continuing to come to church. Awesome. Then after a while, many of you decided to get into a life group, to meet weekly with a small group of other Jesus followers. And you started reading like something with them or studying something with them together. Then you started asking questions that you can't really ask in a church service. Right? And then you listened to them talk about life, and you talked about your life, and you got feedback from them, and slowly but surely, you started to think a little bit differently. You started to see the world from a little bit different angle. And then you started reading stuff on your own, or you started listening to online sermons or podcasts, or you started reading Christian books, and eventually you started reading the Bible, like on your own, not necessarily with a group of people. Now, you didn't understand most of it. But some of it you did, and the more you read, the more you got. And it was like a puzzle where the pieces started to come together. And at first, it was just kind of a mass of chaos, and pretty soon it started to come together for you. And you started listening to like worship music, at least every once in a while, a little bit of worship music. And it was crazy because you're like, wow, I can like feel God speaking to me in this. You know, it's like the strangest thing. And it still is for you. Like you're in your car and you're listening to a song and suddenly your heart is set on fire and you're thinking about your life and you sense that God is communicating something with you. Crazy. Or maybe you started serving in a ministry, or you decided to go on a mission trip or two, or you decided, you know what, I need to go see a counselor, and you engaged in that. Whatever it was you needed, whatever the process was, you did it. You entered into it and you kept moving forward with it, and it just kept deepening. And you look at your life and you go, man, when was the day that transformation happened? And you can't identify it. But somehow over the last several years, and there are several of you in this room, somehow over the last several years, God has really done something extraordinary in your life. And you see the world differently. And in fact, you see everything differently. And when you think back to the former version of you, you just kind of sit back and you smile and you're like, man, it's crazy. I used to be like that. The transformation is undeniable. But, okay, the process has been instrumental. And God has met you in the process and transformed your mind over time. Now, the cool thing is that none of us are done. I mean, I look at my own life and where I was, and I cannot tell you how much I've already been transformed. But at the same time, I go, man, there's so much more that needs to happen. I have so much farther to go. And the reality is we all do. And God will meet us if we enter into a process and we take the time. Now, Paul says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then he tells us why this is so critical. He says, then, okay, in other words, then, after you give yourself to a process over time and begin to be transformed, then you will be able to attest to test and approve what God's will is. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. When your mind is renewed, you begin to see things from a totally different perspective. You start to see the world, and this is crazy, you start to see the world the way God sees it. You start to see what God wants. You start to want what God wants. And when that becomes the backdrop and the filter that you run all of your decisions through, you make drastically better decisions. And you relate to people so much better. And it frees you to experience new things that you could not experience before. Now, what is God's will for your life? If you're a pastor, this is the question people ask. What's God's will for my life? I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, I know some things. He wants you to love people. Like he wants you to have character. But I don't know the specific details. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you is the more that your mind is renewed, the easier it's going to be to see his will in everything. And he will help you do it. He will help you do it. But it's going to take process and it's going to take time. And I'm just telling you right now, okay, a whole lot of regret and a whole lot of resolve coming out of the last very emotional thing, they are not enough. They're not enough. Just because you feel bad about last time and just because you really want something different, just because you feel very emotional about it in this moment, it's not enough. You need time and you need process. Now, this is where a lot of people will kind of pause and say, yeah, well, okay, but I'm new to the whole Jesus thing, the church thing, the Christianity thing. I don't even know what I'm supposed to call it. Is it the Jesus thing? We'll walk through that. But I don't know where to start really because I don't know the process, right? So I don't know what I need to do to be transformed. And if that's you, if you're in a spot like that, here's what I'd say. Do the next thing that you already know you need to do. Do that. Do the next thing you know you already need to do. Right now in your life, you don't know the whole process. I don't know the whole process, and that's totally okay. You do know something. You know that there's something in your life you need to stop, or you know that there's something in your life that you need to start. There's something. It could be as simple as come to church more regularly. You're just like, great, okay, start there. And the reality is that's where I started when I was 19 years old. I didn't know what else to do, so I started there. But see, then this amazing thing happens. You do the one thing that you know you should do, and God shows up and he meets you in that, and he shows you the next thing to do. And if you do that, he'll show you the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and on and on and on. And after you look back after a while, you go, whoa, like I've become a completely different person. This is not rocket science. And you don't have to be a theologian to get it started. You just do what you already know you need to do, and then you wait for God to reveal to you the next thing. So I just want to pause here and say, for some of you, what is the next step that God is inviting you to take? Because I bet you already know. You do. The question is, will you follow? Will you go where he's guiding you? And if you do that, here's what I'm promising you. I'm promising you amazing things will happen. Over time, God renews your mind. And that's essential because if you just think the way you've always thought, you'll do the things you've always done. Now, in the last couple of minutes of this message, I want to get kind of, I don't know if I'd call this practical. We're going to do something different. I'm going to shift gears. And what I want to try to do is get behind this question, what were you thinking? Because it turns out that question actually matters. The last time was a disaster, and you need to do more than just ask, what was I thinking, and then move on. You actually need to find an answer to that question. So for the next few minutes, I want to address several thoughts that we can have. These are assumptions that can just sort of rattle around in our minds sometimes. Ideas that sort of roll around in our subconscious, and they essentially become part of the operating system of our thinking. And when we look back on a disaster and we ask, what was I thinking? If you do the hard work of looking behind the behavior that got you into trouble, you might see one or more of these kinds of things driving your thinking. Now, These may not be your thoughts, like all of these that I'm going to list off at all, but these are very common. It may be that like one of them applies to you, okay? It may be that two of them apply to you. Of course, what's more likely for you is that none of these apply to you. They just apply to all your friends that aren't here this morning. Because that's how this stuff usually works, right? But let me give you some very dangerous assumptions that we often have sort of floating underneath the surface in our minds. I'll call these lethal assumptions. The first is this: if I find the right person, everything will be all right. In other words, the only reason I had trouble last time is because I didn't have the right person yet. But if I can find the right person, there won't be any problems. First of all, I want to say there will always be problems. There will always, when you bring two broken, messy people together and you try to connect them and make them one, and we are all broken and messy on some level, we all are. When you bring two broken people together, there are going to be hurt feelings, and there are going to be misunderstandings, and there are going to be disagreements, and there's going to be differences of opinion, and people aren't going to feel valued all the time, and there's going to be some level of conflict, even if you find exactly the right person. But here's another issue. No matter how perfect the other person is, if you aren't the right person, it's never going to work. So maybe, and I know this is crazy, maybe instead of, like if you've recently coming off of a broken relationship, maybe instead of like getting out there, right, I got to get out there, maybe instead of jumping online and just looking, wherever you go, looking, or whatever it is you do to find the next right person, maybe, just maybe you ought to take a season where you focus more on actually becoming the right person. Okay, here's a thought. If you become the person you're looking for is looking for. What? Okay, I'll say that again. If you become the person you're looking for is looking for, God might do something in you to prepare you. And you may end up having a much better outcome relationally in the next round. But if you just jump right back into the market and you go right back online and you go searching around or you go clubbing or you hit the bars or whatever it is you do, let's be honest, history is bound to repeat itself. Like if you want this to go better, it isn't just about finding the right person. You have to become the right person. You have to become the right person. Here's another lethal assumption. My situation is unique. Huh, really? This is a statement that we love to make anytime we know we shouldn't be doing whatever it is we're doing. Now, like we're like, oh yeah, no, listen, Pastor, I know that for most people, this wouldn't be the right thing. But for me, this is totally the right thing because my situation is unique. This is a justification that enables us to avoid common sense. Some of you, if you look at your last disaster and you ask the question, what was I thinking? This is totally what you were thinking. This is totally what you were thinking. Conventional wisdom does not apply to me because my situation is unique. You wanted to do what you wanted to do, and so even though common sense screamed at you, don't do it. You screamed right back at common sense, you don't understand. My situation is unique. And you went ahead with it and you blew up your life. And so if you're facing a new situation and you hear yourself saying out loud to a friend, or you think to yourself, I know, but my situation is unique, I'm just saying you better watch out, man. You better be careful. Okay, another horribly common lethal assumption is this. Yeah, it's not right, but it makes me happy. And God wants me to be happy. Huh. Interesting. I just want to say as a pastor, my goodness, I've heard this one like 1,000 times. And the truth is, I mean, let's think about it. You can justify anything with that. I mean, there's nothing off limits if this is the justification. Now, for the record, does God want you to be happy? Yes. He wants happiness for you more than you want it for yourself. A lot more. He's way more committed to it for you than you are. But the thing about God is, and this is crazy, he knows more than you do. And he knows what it will actually take to get it. See, for you, he wants more than just like happiness in the sense, he wants meaning. He wants peace. He wants healing. He wants wholeness. For you, he wants this inextinguishable joy. But that can be very different from the stuff that we think makes us happy. Okay, we want happy moments, like little flares of happiness. And I mean, some of you, you've had happy moments and some happy hours on happy weekends. And they were so happy. And then at the end of it all, you said, oh man, what was I thinking? And you were thinking, very plain, very simply, it will make me happy. Now, God wants for you to be happy for sure. But to make a decision based on, well, I know it's wrong, but it will make me happy, and God wants me to be happy, so God wants me to do the wrong thing? Really? I mean, you're just lying to yourself. Look, if it's not right, it's not going to turn out right. Some of you are like, oh, that's brilliant. Jason, that's like, how do you, that's, no, you're sitting here, you're going, I know. Okay, don't we all know this? And we do, and yet we lie to ourselves. I know it's not right, but God wants me to do it? Really? Look, if you ever hear yourself think this, because none of us say these things out loud, like unless you're with a close friend, like at happy hour, we don't admit these things. Look, if you hear yourself thinking, I know it's not right, but I just want to tell you, please hit the pause button. You're about to talk yourself into something that you are going to regret. And we've all had enough experience to know this, but these are the assumptions we make. This is the, what was I thinking? Here's what you were thinking. This is what you were thinking, and this is why it didn't go well. Okay, another one. If only I had blank, then I would be satisfied. If only I drove, if only I wore, if only I lived there, if only I had blank, then I'd be satisfied. Okay, let me ask you a question. Does anyone ever really get just one tattoo? Okay, all right. I'm not knocking tattoos. I think tattoos are great. Some of you are squirming. I think tattoos are great for other people. But see, here's the problem with me. I change my mind way too much for a tattoo. For me, it's the permanency of the thing that gets me. Okay, but I like the look of tattoos. I like tattoos. In fact, just so you all know, I would wear a temporary tattoo. And so if you're out and about and you find something cool and you're like, oh, that has Pastor Jason's name all over it, I just say, yeah, do it. Pass it along. Jen's out of town this week, So, man, you never know. But those of you with like multiple tattoos, this is interesting because for most of you, it started off as one. You're thinking, if I could just get the perfect tattoo, oh man, it would be awesome. And then after a while, it's like, man, I need another tattoo. Now, why is that? Why do things happen like that? Well, it's the nature of appetites. Now, it could be an appetite for anything, right? This is how appetites work. It could be an appetite for anything. It could be new clothes. It could be a new nose, right? I mean, okay, think plastic surgery, right? Does anyone do it just once? Okay, I know, and fewer of you are raising your hand on that one than you were on the tattoo one, but I know people do. I know some people only do it once, but here's the thing, and this is what happens with appetites. They're never fully and finally satisfied. And we can get ourselves into a world of trouble with this. This, what was I thinking buying that? What was I thinking leasing that? Like, what was I thinking getting so consumed with acquiring that? And here's what you were thinking. If I had it, I'd be satisfied. And if you got it, you were for a while. But nothing fully and finally satisfies. Appetites are never satisfied. Appetites for relationships, appetites for sex, appetites for things. Appetites are never satisfied. So I just want to say, if you hear yourself saying that, don't fall for that. Here's another common one, the last one. Sex will solve it. Sex will solve it. And I just want to say, actually, if there's a problem, if there's a problem and you're trying to deal with a problem, sex will complicate it. And look, if you think, well, we're having trouble, but sex will solve it. No, it won't, because sex is not a solution. Sex is an amazing thing. And God is not against sex. He made it up. And you go, well, how did that work? I don't know how that worked. I mean, sometimes I imagine how that all went down. I guess like God was in heaven, right? He's kind of looking down on creation, and he turns to the angels and he says, oh man, I have like the best idea. And the angels are like, what? And he's going, well, actually, you're not going to understand. And God, who created it, placed it in a context where it's awesome. But if you like rip it out of its context, you might as well, it'd be like taking the embers out of your fireplace and out of where that belongs and spreading them all over the carpet or spreading them all over the sofa or all over the house, and then just watching your house go up in flames. And enough of us, and I just want to say enough of us, including me, especially me, and if you know my story, you know I'm not going to get into it all, have burned down houses. We have burned down houses. I mean, my gosh, the wreckage from that in my own life, it solved nothing, and it complicated everything. And some of you, you know all about this. You've done this. Or others of you, you've watched someone that you care about do this. And we know this. We know sex isn't going to solve it. It's just going to complicate it. So the moment you hear yourself thinking that, you need to hit the pause button and you need to go like, whoa, this is like another one of those renewal things. This is like another one of those transformational things. Because we live in a culture that every single day, in like every single ad, screams, sex will solve it. But if we pause and we think for a second, okay, we know. I don't care what your religious background is. We know that that's not true. And you say, Jason, okay, I hear you, but I will be a cultural freak. Like, I'm single. I would be a cultural freak. Okay, well, you might be right, but I guess the question is, I mean, I don't know a better way to think of this. Do you want to be this guy or do you want to be this guy? Like, do you want to be conformed and just let culture push you around? Or do you want to let yourself be transformed? So as we wrap up this morning, here's the ultimate question that I want you to walk away with, wrestling with today. What were you thinking? And whether you were thinking any of the things that I just went through or not, maybe it was other stuff, I'm just telling you. You owe it to yourself to come up with a specific answer to that question. Because taking the time and pausing and doing the hard work to wrestle with that question can change your life. Getting beyond the behavior to the thinking, like, it matters. Giving yourself to a process that can change your thinking, it matters. It takes time. It takes trusting God. It takes a willingness not to let culture dictate its values to you. It takes work, it takes intentionality. But I will tell you, and this is my experience and the experience I've seen in the lives of many of you, there is nothing else like it. There's nothing else like it. And right now, wherever you are, whatever your history is, God is inviting you. He's inviting you and he's saying, trust me. Trust me. Let me lead you. Let me transform you. Okay, that's the way. And joy is waiting. And joy like you've never known. It's waiting for you, but this is the way. This is the way. So trust me and let me lead you. And the invitation is out there. And we can do with it as we please. And again, if you're like, well, I don't know. I wouldn't even know how to respond to that. I don't know how to engage in do the thing you already know you need to do. Start there. Do that as faithfully as you know how, and then let God speak to you the next step, the next thing. That's all it is.